welcome to the Old Sword Club. Well, not really weekly anymore. Live stream. So tonight we're going to talk about what HMB or Buhurt, sort of the Battle of the Nation style combat, can teach HEMA. And so I'm joined by Dan Cooper. So,
hey everyone.
Yep. Hello, Dan. So you're like you're sort of the coach instructor of the Ballarat Medieval Combat Club, and you said you do both
Yeah, that's right.
HEMA and HMB there. And you've
Yep.
got I think because you've got like massive CV. I was just like, oh, I can rattle that thing off really quickly, but no, like see what like you're captain of the Western Wolves.
Yep.
You've been
HMB team.
Yep, yeah, and you've also been in like the Australian national team at Battle of the Nations.
Yep.
Yeah, which is cool. And you're, and you're also like Australian champion, HMB champion for longsword and sword and buckler dueling categories. And yeah, you just done a whole heap of stuff. So
Yeah, great fun.
Yeah,
and
cool.
HEMA's definitely helped with that.
Oh, well, that's really cool because I think like one thing I was really curious about is how the two kind of relate. So I thought to start off with, could you talk us through like Buhurt, HMB, Battle of the Nations? Like, there's not really consistent terms, and the more I was kind of looking into this, especially when I was thinking that this is something I wanted to do, the more I realized there seems to be a lot of confusion out there, particularly in the HEMA community, about what exactly HMB, I guess, or Buhurt or whatever it is, actually is. Like, what are the correct terms? What do they all mean? What is this? What is the activity, basically?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start out with the main category, which is the group fights. So call that Buhurt. So that's generally 5v5. But there's also had a bit of a connection hiccup there. You can hear me, can you?
Yeah, I can hear you now. A little hiccup.
All right, cool.
Yep. All right. So anyways, you're saying so Buhurt is the group categories.
Yep. And also at last Battle of Nations introduced a 150 versus 150 Buhurt, which is pretty insane. That's like just a full-on medieval battle, and like it's pretty awesome because you get to do formations of a lot more complexity at that size. So they had drone footage and just looked like Total War from above, even like the little square units and everything. It was really good.
Oh, like Total War the game.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's pretty cool. Yeah, no, I think I've seen footage of that. That was really, really cool.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Cool. So so it's something, because I think most people are very familiar with is the group fighting. Like, I mean, every Battle of the Nations, I love to just have like the live streams on.
Yeah, big spectacle.
Yeah, no, it's really, really cool to watch. But yeah, so you're saying, but there's also like one-on-one dueling categories.
Yeah.
Cool. Which, from what I gather, they're both scored differently. So, So in the melee or the group categories, I get the impression your goal is to try and knock someone over. Whereas, it's
basically like to get your opponent down by any means necessary in the rule set. So there's some no hit zones for safety, like you can't hit to the back of the neck or the back of the knee, stuff like that, because back of the knee typically is extremely difficult to armor. So we don't want to be crippling all our fighters. But like people get their heads pulled down, so that can expose the back of the neck. So it's just a no-go zone for strikes. Or like some helmets, the padding is a bit insufficient in the back of the head. So strikes there. Okay. Can seriously. Oh, another hiccup. What was the last thing you heard?
So you're saying problems with strikes to the back of the neck.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I guess how do you get someone to the ground then? Like, obviously,
Yeah.
if you're not allowed to just physically maim someone, like, what's,
Oh,
you
well,
primarily use
you
weapon
kind
strikes?
of are,
You
as
kind of
long as
are.
it's like, yeah. So like, a lot of it comes into teamwork with grappling. So you can throw someone to the ground. That's the main way you'll get someone down. But something that you don't get in HEMA really is opportunities for power strikes, because you've got your actively defending opponent who can intelligently defend your strikes, cover their openings. But if you have a friend who can, say, hold someone open, hold their arm exposed, then an axe could come in and just smash those ribs there, and they can't defend themselves because your teammate's holding them.
Wow.
So that's a really big thing, as the strikes typically come into play in teamwork on a single fighter, whereas a lot of the one-on-one stuff, that'll be determined by grappling, not by strikes.
Okay, so like one-on-one in the Buhurt. So
Yeah.
if you one-on-one if you one-on-one in Buhurt, then it's just wrestling skill. It's mostly wrestling skill, kind of like judo-y sort of stuff.
Or you might be fencing a bit, trying to keep each other in the same area or hold their attention, so that they don't break off and like knock over your mate when they're not paying attention, stuff like that. So a lot of fencing strikes are more just to occupy them rather than actually do damage and get them to want to take a knee. And that's another thing. You can surrender if you take a knee. So if you like feel like you're going to get injured, you can just drop out.
Wow. Yeah. So quite brutal sport. Like.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Wow. I said sort of leads to the next question then. So if you've got someone who's maybe joined like an HMB club,
Yeah.
what sort of things would they learn if they're not doing HEMA, they're not doing like mixed martial arts or anything outside? They're just learning the HMB stuff. Like, what kinds of skills would they pick up? What kind of things would you be teaching them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So all my sessions sort of go through a warm-up routine. So you get your dynamic stretching, so you get a lot of skills through that, and some body weight exercises, so you get all warmed up. So fitness and athleticism are really key, because when you've got all that armor, you can't afford to not be fit, because you just can't do anything. You're instantly tired. That's another thing that sort of, I guess, like a pro and a con between HMB and HEMA. If you are in armor, you have to have your body up to the level to handle it, because you're draining at such a higher rate than you would be just fencing in your fencing equipment. So a lot of fitness coaching, that sort of thing, and stretching, really important. And then straight up, it's grappling will be the first thing they learn. So without weapons and without equipment, it'll just be clinch grappling straight up. So just learning how to move someone off the list. So the list is the fence that we fight inside. So yeah, just moving them around, learn how the body feels being moved around, what kind of force you need to apply, and all that stuff. Just sort of, you learn over a long time just through experience and getting time up in an active grapple. And then let's do that for a bit. We'll move on to the list, because moving someone on the list has similarities, but also it's very unique when you've got a fence there that you can use in a grapple. So moving people around that, rotating them, learning how to create opportunities for teammates while also keeping your back to the fence. Because if it's open to the center of the list, your spine's exposed to strikes. So that's all that stuff you got to keep in mind. And also like scanning the arena. So awareness is extremely important. Another thing that you don't really touch on in HEMA is like a battlefield awareness, the situational awareness, because if you get tunnel visioned on one fighter, someone else is going to come and take you out. So yeah, it's really good. And then we'll go into some throws usually. So takedowns, a lot of them pretty similar to stuff like judo. And you use those from the clinch grappling, where you're just moving someone around. You'll learn how you can move them to create opportunities to destabilize them first. And then once you have that dominating position, then you can go through with the takedown without going over yourself.
Okay, cool. And what sort of things would you do? Like, because you talked about like teamwork, stuff like that, and you touched on with the grappling that a big part of it is, you know, not exposing yourself and having situational awareness. But what kinds of things do you do to train people to say fight in formations, like you mentioned before with the Buhurt, or like, you know, train people to work together? Like, is that a big part of the training, or is that just sort of something you kind of pick up instantly, or like what do you do to kind of get people able to do that effectively?
So we usually do that with some like sparring drills. So when it's fighting on the list, which is that fence again, we usually have 2 against 2 on one side. So that simulates basically half the fight. So you've got 2 of these 2v2 fights happening at the same time in a Buhurt round. So you'll have 3 different roles. Generally, you'll have an anchor who's basically holding your front line there on the fence. So their objective is to take down the person in front of them, or create opportunities for their partner to strike on their opposing anchor, and also take them down. Sorry, not take. To hold distance. So if you have less room to move around than your opponent team, you're at a this connection's a bit. What was the last thing you got there?
You fuzzed it out. So you're saying, like, if people, you know, you've got your anchor, your goal is to sort of start moving people around. So you're talking about, you were talking about the like different team roles.
So you need you need to have that field control. So you've got room to retreat or maneuver when needed, and you can also constrict the other team's options. And another thing that can happen is you have these things called scan cycles. So takes someone around a second and a half to sprint in armor from one side of the list to the other. So that's like your window where you can actually focus on the person you're fighting. And then you're going to have to look around every time then. Otherwise, you could get blindsided.
Yeah.
So if you gain ground on your enemy, they have a wider area to scan, which means they've got less active fight time than you do.
Okay, so you actually, that's really, really cool. So actually, one of your ways of sort of controlling is just forcing people to, you know, to control a bigger and bigger sort of amount of space.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really.
So they're spending more time checking their surroundings than actually fighting.
Yeah, because and I guess that goes back to sort of the thing you're saying before with like the risk of being blindsided. It's the thing that's. I mean, you got like on YouTube with all of sort of the see HMB highlight reels, and it's half of them are just someone just gets blindsided from behind, like someone just basically bum rushes them and knocks them over.
Oh, absolutely.
Just always looks really, really cool.
Yeah, and that usually happens when someone's a bit slack with their scan cycles. So it's just like, got a bit of a freight train. How heavy some of these guys weigh in armor, just coming at you, you're getting taken off your feet. So it's a really critical thing to ingrain into people all the time when they're training.
Yeah.
So then that second role is partnered up with the anchor. So they're just slightly off them. So you got your anchor on the fence, and then you got they call you floater. So your floater, they generally will either be defending the anchor with a sword and shield, or they'll take a pole arm and be trying to do more damage with strikes. So for them, they'll be trying to occupy the opponent floater so that they can't do damage to their own anchor, while also looking for opportunities to harass and damage their anchor to give their ally an advantage in that grapple that they're having. So it just adds that extra dynamic to what would otherwise be just a 1-1 test of whose list grappling is superior. So that's a whole extra dynamic there. But the two anchors aren't really committing to fighting each other. That can change if someone wants to try and push through, but generally. And then if, say that anchor is fighting two people and you're confident they'll survive, they can leave them to their own devices and float to a different side of the field to press a numerical advantage in a different fight that's happening. Because there could be as many as 5 different fights happening in the list at once. A lot of the time it devolves into 5 1v1s. So like that formation breaks, it gets a lot more dynamic.
Yeah, and you've got that thing. You've also sort of got like an element of like concentration of force where you've got these sort of 5 1v1s, but if one person gets an opening to have 1 2-on-1 fight, then you've got like a considerable advantage. It's actually thing I noticed. Yeah, it's actually a thing I noticed doing reenactment combat, just doing little skirmishes. When you have like a 5v5 skirmish, as soon as one person goes down on one side, like that's usually whichever side loses a person is probably going to lose the battle just because the other team.
Oh, it's extremely hard to recover from. And like at the highest level competitions like Buhurt Prime, like the team that loses the first fighter, connection's okay. Yeah, the person that loses the first fighter is most likely going to lose. Like, I don't think might have seen like 1 recovery, but it's very slim chances because then you can just have people tie up people and then just have 1 2v1 and then it's like almost like dominoes, just chop them down one by one, just work through the whole team. So that was 2 of the roles I described, and then the third one is a center. So they hold this the center ground between the two fences, so they're going to stop the opponent's center breaking through and then flanking, because one of the most damaging things and is part of the reason why centers are often responsible for the result of a fight is they're the ones that make things happen and change the flow of the fight. So they could break through and then come around and hit someone from behind and take them out, and then they've got a numerical advantage and most likely going to win the round.
Okay, wow. So
looking for opportunities while also maintaining that field control and stopping the opponent center from taking the opportunities.
Okay, cool. So just so you want your center would presumably be like your best player, so to speak.
It depends. Like generally you sort of might, because they can fill a more of a commander role. Also, if you've got a smaller person, it almost becomes more of a runner role where they're going to be faster than, say, you've got a massive dude who's your center who can maybe hold ground really well. If you have someone who's light, they can move around quickly and do a lot of hit and run harassment and, do like a flying kick and knock someone over and then bounce around to the next guy, wreak some havoc that way. So there's definitely a lot of options that they can do. That's sort of like where the dynamic nature of the fight.
Okay, cool. So
you can also like start with floaters and center, because floaters could break off, make something happen if they see a really good opportunity. So you've always got to watch them.
Okay, so when people are training, like do people train to be like floaters and anchors and centers, or is it you train and you sort of switch up which position is which on the day? Like, is it? I guess the question is how specialized are the players?
All right. So pretty much everyone trains everything unless it's like a dueling category. If it's for specific dueling, then that's like a one-on-one category, or pro fight, which is more the medieval MMA stuff.
Hmm.
If you're training for the group fights, you'll train everything because you need to know the roles, because you'll be coming up against them. You need to know their strengths and weaknesses, and you need to feel out where you're most confident. And one of the big reasons, say you're in the center, but and you generally won't be on the list in the middle of a fight, or at the start of the fight when you're in formation and that hasn't broken down, because it usually only lasts like a minute or less. You can get forced to the list. So then you need to know all the skills an anchor would know in order to survive on the list and maybe even take the dude down. And like, if you take down your guy, the opposing anchor, then you have a chance to float and do some damage yourself. So you really need to have that well-rounded skill set.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so and from the sounds of things, people actually change roles sort of mid-fight as well.
Yeah, it's like the formation's only for the first fight, first stage of the fight. It goes through several stages. But when you're picking a team to field, you'll pick them based on their strengths as a fighter. So that's where it comes in. But that depends on the other makeup of the team. So you have someone that's really strong grappling on the list, you'll put them as the anchor. Someone who's a bit better at striking, you put them as a floater. Then you switch it around. Someone with good field awareness, have them. So,
okay, cool. And so how does that? So you mentioned one-on-one categories as well.
yeah.
So I think because you said you're a champion at longsword and sword and buckler. What are those? What are the one-on-one categories that they have in Battle of the Nations?
Yeah, so there's 4 dueling categories, all with different rule sets. So longsword is points you score just with solid, clean strikes, with like 2 points of movement minimum. And they have to be of a certain acceptable level of power to be counted. So you get 2 points for, say, a head or a torso hit, and then 1 for a limb shot. And it's a continuous, 1 round is continuous 90 seconds. So there's no breaks on a strike. You've got to keep going. That's where this athleticism comes in. Because if you're fitter than the other guy, you're very likely to win just by outpacing them. But then it comes into the art of getting your, striking and defending at the same time, covering your center line so you can, get that cross guard into play.
Yeah, so it's more kind of like HEMA skills.
Yeah, that's where that sort of comes in quite heavily. There's no thrusting, which is the main difference, probably with HEMA and HMB would be in the dueling categories, because you don't have that wrestling or punching, all that sort of stuff. That's when you actually do notice the lack of thrusting. So it's quite dynamic. It's like longsword almost starts feeling more like saber almost.
Yeah.
Because you're doing a lot of the big parry cut.
Yes. Okay, so parry plus becomes much more important when you can't thrust.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Another thing that's great about just doing HMB duels is it allows you to go full intensity, where you can't do that in HEMA, because you'll be injuring people because of the lack of sufficient protective gear to handle that, and for a sustained period of time. So you don't have that break of the flow of a fight when you have to reset, which is a great training tool, but it's also really good to say, just keep going, and whatever effect a strike has is what effect it has.
Yeah. What's I mean, I guess the big criticism you see of continuous sparring like that is that, and also with differential point values, is it trains people to tank hits. So people might be like, oh, I can take one if I take one on the forearm and to get a guaranteed head hit, I'm still coming out ahead. Is that something do you find that sort of thing happens a lot? Like that mentality of, I'll tank a hit to give a bigger hit, or is that more just kind of people, or is that more just something people have assumed without actually seeing any evidence for it?
I mean, like, it does happen. It's probably a bit more complicated with your lower skilled level fighters, where um, they might not necessarily understand how to cover their line properly, and also when they're really tired, it's like, oh, just got to keep hitting the guy. So it's like chop, 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 and then it's like both people trying to chop down trees. But
Yeah.
when you get to your higher level, really skilled stuff, it becomes very similar to how HEMA is, where you got to cover yourself, but your doubles and stuff still happen. And if someone goes for your leg, you can try and void it by getting your leg out of the way, but you go and get that headshot in. But you can sort of always cut to the head and then push in and bind with their sword, and then you can do some grappling with the arms to get through and strike.
Cool.
So you definitely want to cover yourself. You don't just take hits. But it does happen. Same way doubles happen in HEMA. But it's a lot more similar than you'd think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, I mean, I guess that's kind of a thing as well. For me, because my interest is often or when I'm analyzing like a martial art, focuses on the training, the skills you learn.
Yeah.
Because like you said, HEMA people go on all the time about minimizing doubles or punishing doubles in tournaments, and blah blah blah. But you see, like, really, any kind of interclub bouting, any kind of tournament, doubles happen all the time, because that's just
exactly
the thing with fighting.
Yeah.
No,
it isn't this neat thing you can control. It's chaotic in nature.
Yeah, so I guess that breaks. So you said that, like, the dueling categories in HMB are quite similar to, or end up being a lot more similar to, HEMA. Do you find that, like, do a lot of the people who like focus on those train HEMA for that, or is like
a lot of the high level people do?
Yeah. Okay. So it's
like a lot of the there's a few of the high level European countries as well. They've got a lot of HEMA equipment at their gym, and they got a lot of people with HEMA experience as well. So it's quite well integrated into HMB dueling. It's just the safety equipment is just we just can't do thrusting safely. In the helmets and stuff we're using, we'd be losing eyes, all that sort of stuff. So it's sort of the reality that we have to do that.
Yeah, but by the same token, you can go full force in a way that you can't in HEMA.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's another thing with the like being trying to go in strong into a bind, all that stuff in HEMA. It's always got to be tempered, because you could end up really hurting your sparring partner. Whereas that isn't an issue in HMB. If you get to go fully as hard as you can, which totally changes that dynamic, and something I wish could sort of be explored a bit more with the fencing equipment. There's just all that balance with having to control the intensity.
Yeah, well, I guess, but by the same token, like, if you got people who are doing both HEMA and HMB, then you sort of you kind of you can kind of compensate for the weaknesses of one with the other, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. They're very complementary, which is why I love doing both of them. It's like two sides of a coin.
Yeah. Cool. And so anyway, I think we sort of got off topic. So you're saying, so the dueling categories, there's longsword. What are the other three categories?
Yeah. You can still hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah, cool. You're back now.
Yeah. So sword and buckler, which is another category. This one ends up being a lot more like HEMA than the longsword, because it's not a continuous just 90 seconds, however many strikes hit, how many hit. It's first 2-5 clean blows, and then it breaks, and that's the end of a round. So it's still continuous, but you really need to focus on covering all your openings and fencing properly. Otherwise, you get taken out very quick. Yes, and that's best out of 3 rounds. So the fights can be really short, or they can sort of be prolonged and really tense when people's defenses are tight. You're also allowed to grapple in that as well. So you could get in and say tie up an arm and then move them around where they can't hit you, but you can like score some strikes on their legs, stuff like that. Then there's also polearm dueling. This one's a bit different because it's got a rope in the center of the list. And you lose points if you step too far away from your opponent. So you're in this range where you've got to keep engaging, and that's a timed round as well. But that fact that you can't cross the rope and grapple someone makes it a very different dynamic again, because you can't just go in and tie someone up. You've got to try and snipe those polearm shots and then defend yourself at the same time. So that's another one that's probably a little bit more like HEMA in that sense, because you've got that standoff phase really heavily in there. And then last one, which is sword and shield, is a lot like structured a lot like longsword. Out to 90 seconds. But yeah, it's just with a sword and shield, and I think that one's just 1 point anywhere, solid strikes.
Okay, cool.
And those ones typically go for 2 rounds.
Oh, cool. And so that begs the question, why are the rules different? Like, why are they different? Why are they different rule, or like quite radically different rules in some cases across the 4 dueling categories?
I guess it's just to keep up a variety of fighting. I'm not sure. Like, occasionally they tweak up the rules. Like, they might restrict some type of grappling or something. So you can't, say in longsword, they want to encourage the sword play. So you can't just go in and tie someone up and hug them so they can't hit you. Then you'll get broken up, sort of like in a boxing match.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
so it's
cool.
like they try to encourage a certain type of fighting.
Okay, cool. So that's
sorry, what were you saying?
I was just saying it's really cool. Like, it's really interesting how different they are. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, usually with sports, there's sort of this push towards unification, or like similar rules. Like, I mean, obviously with Olympic fencing, the rules are different across the 3 different weapons, but like, they're small differences. They're generally quite small differences. I mean, say Olympic saber and Olympic foil are really similar in terms of the rule set. Epee is a bit more different for historical reasons, but yeah, it's kind of interesting that HMB's kind of seems to have gone the other way, where you have these very very diverse kind of rule sets.
Yeah.
Which I find kind of interesting. The other point I kind of want to touch on from like way back, was when you're talking about the training in terms of like the physical fitness, the grappling training, and things like that. One thing that really struck me about it is that's actually probably more similar to what a medieval knight would have, medieval knights did in terms of their training. I mean, like a lot of wrestling was very important to medieval knights, but also like fitness stuff. I mean, there's accounts of Norman knights where a Norman knight actually says, to become a good knight, what you do, or what you should do, is every day you should train. You should put on all your armor and train for 2 hours. And he says the best thing to do is spar with a friend. How they're sparring, we don't know, but if you can't do that, just find a field or a hill or something, just run up and down it for 2 hours. Yeah.
Armor fitness is entire different type of fitness. It's so extreme on your body. Like you can have someone who's like fit in some other way, like like really good at weightlifting, or like a sprinter, anything like that. Chuck them in armor, it's totally different, and they gas out in like 30 seconds.
Okay, wow. So if you had people coming over from like other sports into HMB, like is that it? So like I know like with HEMA we do get a lot of, or we get Olympic fencers coming over occasionally. But yeah, do you get sort of, sprinters or weightlifters or something coming over a lot and finding it really different, or is it more?
Yeah, like and lots of people with different martial arts background, a lot of army guys.
Wow.
Yeah, like totally, like everyone you'll talk to will have a very different background. So it's pretty cool to see how like all that fits in.
It's really, really cool.
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah.
What were you saying?
Oh, I was gonna. So the other thing I've been wondering. So, with medieval tournaments, I'm unfortunately moving house again soon, so I couldn't find the book. But one of the earliest sources we have for tournament rules, this guy basically writes this big list of questions for tournament judges. 90% of them revolve around theft, like medieval tournaments.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I guess the question is, so in Buhurt, I take it there's no, like, you can't like steal someone's horse mid-match or anything like that.
Oh, like stealing someone's weapon or something.
Yeah. You thought...
Like in a say?
Oh no, it's more just kind of, I guess that was more just my observation about it, in terms of the similarities between like Buhurt, or like between the essentially modern tournament, modern medieval tournaments and historical ones. Is historical ones, they during the Middle Age itself, they seem to be quite obsessed with like they seem to be quite interested in loot within the tournament, whereas obviously in Buhurt, like modern day, that doesn't seem to be.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just
no. No, all the equipment's very expensive. They don't want to part with it.
Fair enough.
Big emphasis on trade, though. You usually have people setting up some shops there, like some armorers and stuff will come along with some armor, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, cool. And yeah, so it's a big event. Like I remember when Battle of the Nations first got big, they put out a lot of stuff about like not just the tournament aspect, but also like kind of the reenactment aspects as well.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So is that something you also sort of engage in? Like, do you
not me personally. So that's like, I'm just there pretty much purely as a fighter. Like, that's something I probably want to get, is just some like nice reenactment soft kit to wear, just when I'm going around the festival, not fighting. But you'll see all the stores are all in historical tents. They're all in like reenactment garb, all that stuff. So it's like the environment's great. Like you got a lot of people who love the sport and like build that whole theme around it. So it's like, it almost becomes like a reenactment fair with the fighting as part of it. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. No, it's, I mean, like I said, it's an amazing spectacle. Like I really, really enjoy watching it. I thought, just before we keep going, did want to mention, if anyone has any questions, just to chuck them down in the chat, and we will get to them eventually. Just yeah, if you have any questions for Dan, or even me for some reason, I don't know why you're asking me questions. Okay, but I think because when you were telling me about like your background, your training, like in addition to sort of HEMA and like the HMB stuff, you said you also do like mixed martial arts. Do you find that within HMB, like particularly because it's a newer kind of sport, hobby, whatever, there's a big emphasis on bringing in skills, like trying to like go out, find a skill, bring it in, and being sort of very, very like eclectic like that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like there's no real like doctrine into, this is the skill set of HMB. Like it's sort of forming into that slowly, but it's not really quite there yet. So you're still And the thing is, you've got all these different martial arts. I guess it's kind of the way MMA is as well. So MMA is an amalgamation of like all these other martial arts that are adapted for a rule set and a fight format. That's the same as what HMB is. So it's kind of like you throw everything from MMA and from HEMA, strip what you can't use in the rule set, and then what you're left with is what can be done in HMB. And that just gets refined the more you train and explore different possibilities.
Yeah, well, like when I was looking at it as well, there seems to be a big emphasis on kind of like simple and effective. Like I noticed in some of the one-on-one fights I was watching, like I've been watching, I'm like, wow, like you see fighters who seem to like they only really seem to have like 3 techniques that they just kind of use in succession. But yeah, like just kind of really kind of like simple and direct. Like do you find that? Do you find like, or is that like a really common thing where HMB training is kind of a crash course in simple techniques, and then if you want to get better at it or like more proficient, you go out and cross train like HEMA or MMA, judo, whatever? Or is it more kind of is it just the nature of the competition means that you just want simple, effective?
I'll sort of generally like what you want to do is the stuff that your armor allows you to do, stuff that where your armor won't catch and get you, say, brought down with your opponent, because that's a massive thing, armor getting caught, and how that restricts your movement as well. So that all lends itself to simple movements. And there also tend to be the highest percentage chance of successful execution. So say you just do a leg sweep, time that right. There's a high percentage that won't result in going down, and there's a good chance it could take your opponent out or at least destabilize them and create other opportunities. Or you could do a simple outer leg reap, nothing crazy, still staying standing, but it gives you the highest chance of staying on your feet and not getting brought down with your opponent. So that's all where that lends in. It's always developing though, always trying new things, workshopping new stuff, and everyone brings in something new to it with their backgrounds. It's evolving.
That's really cool. That's really, really cool. So I've got a few questions.
Yeah.
So I think someone's actually linked to the rules, but so it's still worth repeating. So John Gilbert wants to know what the scoring system for longsword is again. If you can break that down a bit more detail.
Yeah. All right. So 1 point for a strike to the limbs, 2 points for strike to the head or the torso, and you have 90 seconds in a round. So you can score as many points as you can in that round. What you can also do is, say, if you clinch.
I think you've frozen again.
If you clinch into that, sorry, what was the last bit you heard?
Oh, so yeah, you're saying so you got up to. So you're saying 1 point for the 1 point for a limb, 2 points for head or torso, and then you started describing what you can do in a clinch.
Yeah. So if you clinch up to someone, so you're tying them up so they can't strike you, you can get broken up, and then you might have like a 3-point penalty against you.
I guess
so that the rules are pretty simple.
That's kind of cool. So there's like a penalty for stalling, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, but like you can also like get disqualified if you do it too much. So you get like a yellow card for it. But you can sort of play the rules a bit and do that if someone's got you tied up and just keeps getting these legs as strikes on you. It's like, no, I don't want to be in this situation. And then you can force that break.
Yeah.
Because that could be advantageous to you to get out of that.
Okay, cool. So I guess okay, cool. So and do you find that you get like different types of fighters, like in boxing, we talk about like out fighters and pressure fighters and counter fighters and things like that. Do you get sort of a similar thing in like the dueling categories where you've got like different kinds of, I guess, approaches? Like the
Oh,
way,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So
it's like people that just try to like bull rush you, basically push you up against the fence and hack away at your legs, and like use their shoulder and their head to like press your sword into your chest so you can't swing it and just hack away at you. You have like lots of counter strikers, so they might wait for you to strike and then just like parry and strike and then stay out at distance. And then you have people that sort of just try to overwhelm with pressure and sort of rely on their fitness a bit to just outpace the other person. It's like a lot of different approaches.
Oh, cool. That's really, really cool. So yeah. All right, so let's look at another question. So if someone asks, or John Gilbert is asking, in the 5v5 competition, is a sword more common than a mace or warhammer, and why?
Okay. So sword is far more common, and that's because we don't use anti-armor weapons in HMB, just for safety of fighters. Like if you use a warhammer, probably the main thing that I've sort of experienced with warhammers is just that maximal force transfer. Like it gets that purchase with the edges and the small surface area. So you get that maximum transfer through, which you can still get with an axe if you've got really good edge alignment. But a big thing I found is it just smashes up gear. Like your armor gets destroyed pretty quick. So it helps keep your...
Yeah, you're not going to be too popular. I was going to say you're not going to be too popular if you're going around like breaking people's gear.
Yeah, you are actually allowed to use maces though, but they have to be limited to a kilogram, whereas you can have a sword or an axe heavier. So, like, you get that advantage of not needing the edge alignment, but like don't have the same potential of force that you would have with an axe just under the rule set. And warhammers are just flat out not allowed. No, like warhammers or spikes, anything like that.
Yeah, well.
But you can take in a halberd that has a hammer, like on the back of it, but with that surface.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a sword is really beneficial in the 5v5s because it doesn't get tangled up in grapples like an axe would. So you can have an axe get caught in armor, or someone can grab onto the haft of it and tie it up, whereas they're not allowed to grab the blade of a sword.
Wow.
So you've got that freedom.
Cool. Yeah, so so it sort of...
It also allows you to defend yourself a bit better with a shield.
That's kind of interesting as well. Like, so much of the fighting seems to actually revolve around grappling.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. All right, so then we've got another question again from John Gilbert. Everyone is allowed to ask questions, not just John. Although John is allowed to ask as many questions as he likes, so whatever. But yeah, so is there a point value? Wants to know. I'm assuming this is in regards to the one like the dueling, particularly longsword dueling. Is there a point value for throws?
All right, so there's no throws in any of the dueling categories. They're actually a yellow card, but there is in the pro fight category, which is like the medieval MMA. Which is the one category I hadn't touched on yet. So a throw would be 3 points in that format. And then you have 10 seconds of a potential ground and pound where if you're in the dominant position, you gain double points. So say every strike you land on them, you'd be getting 2 points instead of 1. And generally, if you pull off successful ground and pound, you've won the fight. It's incredibly hard to recover from that point loss. So
Wow.
yeah, throws are very valuable like that. So yeah, 3 points in pro fight.
And in pro fight, can you tank hits, or is it just, or like, you know, is it sort of the thing where you have to get in and actually grapple someone without being struck on the way in?
It generally goes through phases of fencing and then phases of grappling, because you're using different muscle sets. You'll fence for a bit, you'll fatigue, or one will decide, oh, this person's a better fencer than me, I'm going to make this into a grapple. And then you'll clinch up, and that's where you'll be getting a lot more sort of punches and throwing in some knees, all that sort of stuff. So it becomes more like a clinch fight you might see in like Muay Thai, something like.
I think you're frozen again, or maybe I've frozen.
I don't know, my internet's playing up.
It's always the way. It's, you know, curse the Australian internet.
What was the last bit you got there?
Oh, so you're saying that the pro fights they're more like Muay Thai fights, where you come in, you clinch, and then you can throw like punches and knees. Is it like?
Yeah, and elbows, all that sort of stuff, and kicks.
Oh, cool. And then the goal is, and then hopefully sort of take your opponent to the ground and just wail on them for 10 seconds and basically win the match.
Yeah, there's a problem though, because like if you're trying to force a throw and you sacrifice striking for that, you're not gaining points during that period. So if you're trying to force a throw and you don't pull it off, that's all that time you've wasted where you could have been scoring points, where the other guy might just be doing some defensive grappling and then maybe sneaking in some rib shots or rib punches with the shield or something like that, just chipping away some points. And that generally goes for 2 or 3 rounds, depending on which tournament is being run, and then 90-second rounds. Or if you're at the World Championship, the World WMFC Championships, which is a sort of a different organization than HMB, but the same rule set. Those can be 3-minute rounds, which is just total like exhaustion. It's ridiculous. And that's usually the ones you'll see in like the octagon with the chain, that fight format.
Yeah, and then fitness very important.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That's actually, I mean, it's probably most interesting. It's probably the biggest difference, I think. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, like fitness is important in HEMA, but like you talk to a HEMA person about what they do, like, you know, me or whoever, like we'll talk about like technique, you know, judging distance, like creative openings, like very, very sort of technical and tactical. Whereas, yeah, like the way you sort of phrase it with HMB, it sounds like, you know, very like, you know, just fitness is just really, really key to the whole thing.
Yeah. And sort of like that with any type of fighting, because all technique is an efficient application of strength.
Yeah.
So like you can do, especially with an edged weapon, that's just such a massive force multiplier. If you're on against an unarmored opponent, you don't need that much force to cause grievous injury. But then, you know, say you're in a fight, you've got to last multiple fights against like multiple opponents, something like that. That's when you'd really need to be that athletic, and also pressing aggression and being able to like control the pace of a fight is where a lot of athleticism comes in. Because in HEMA, you never really get to that phase of that more scrappy phase of the fight where, all right, say you come in for a bind or whatever, one of you winds in and slices or gets the thrust off, then you reset. You don't have to keep pressing until the fight's over. So that whole extra test of endurance is something that you get to explore in HMB, which is something that you would have in a fight, because you wouldn't just get a cut and then it would and be done. You'd have to actually go through a whole extra phase of the fight, which isn't present in HEMA.
Yeah, you sort of
generally, unless you try to introduce it.
Yeah, well, and this is the thing, I guess. Like, I mean, you're right though. Like most like most HEMA clubs I've seen, the bouting is to the first hit. Like it
Yeah.
very much, very much kind of mimics historical duels where it was to first blood or things like that. But yeah, we don't. Something I think I think the thing that HEMA kind of really needs is actually looking at different scenarios like street fights or battlefield stuff where it's like, yeah, actually, you're not going to
definitely.
stop. Like, you're not going to stop when there's injuries. You're not going to have like the seconds rush in and make sure that no one actually dies, or have your opponent back down because they're like, oh god, I'm going to lose this, whatever. Like, so yeah, sort of slightly different kind of tactical situation, which
Yeah.
I think is really, really cool. It's kind of been really, like, I think it's been really, really cool to sort of see how that comes in or how that works in HMB. Cool. So I've got another question.
It's a really useful tool though, that like first blood tactic, and it really does strengthen that need for defense, which is really key in HEMA.
Yeah.
Right, this next question.
Yep. So cool. This one kind of flows to the next. So I did kind of skip over Cameron's question, but we will get back to it. So yeah, given that there is a lot of grappling, are disarms allowed? Are they, do they score high points?
Disarms are absolutely allowed. Generally, it'd be like a 3-point. It'd be like 3 points against the fighter that lost their weapon if it's in a singles category. But it's like it can be tricky to pull one off because you aren't allowed to grab a sword blade. There's still ways to do it, and pretty common with axes as well, seeing as you can say you've got your shield strapped on, you've still got a free hand to grab, so you can grab someone's axe and work a disarm that way. Yeah, there's a lot of different actions, or just striking someone in the hands to drop their weapon, that sort of thing. In the dueling categories, that'll result in that point penalty and a reset. So you basically get split apart, they'd get their weapon back, and then you'd continue fighting. Yeah, in the group fights, it's a little different. If you lose your weapon, you aren't allowed to do any offensive actions, but you can still defend yourself. So that means you'd have to try and get back to your side of the list where you started, and then you can retrieve a backup weapon, or you can wear a weapon on your belt, or even grab a weapon from one of your teammates' belts.
Cool. So, yeah. All right. So next, speaking of weapons, so someone said should be said that it's a specific sword, generally not a regular arming sword. So I think there's a bit more of a comment, but yeah. So when I look at like armors and stuff, I notice that they often have HEMA and HMB or HEMA and Buhurt as distinct categories of product they sell. So do you find that that's really common, that Buhurt you'll use like one type of sword, whereas in like HEMA or in like even in potentially in the dueling category you'll use another? Or
oh, absolutely. So in Buhurt you'll be almost always using a falchion, provided you're wearing a Western style of armor. That's because the extra blade mass you have allows for more powerful strikes. Okay. Whereas in a duel, you'll be using an arming sword generally, so it'd be a bit light. It won't be as heavily balanced towards the point, so you can be more nimble, and you've also got your short edge, so you can do more techniques and strike with both edges. So opens up new opportunities there. So your sword and buckler and your sword and shield duels, you'll use an arming sword for those. And then for pro fight and Buhurt, you'll be using a falchion. Or you could use an arming sword for pro fight, but they've got different rules, very tight regulations on what type of sword you can use. And that's to encourage the style of fighting. So it's not too light, so you can't just do heaps of different strikes with a sword to rack up points. You have to more use your punches, your kicks, and knees, so you can't just fully rely on sword work.
Okay, yeah. So they're trying to discourage kind of, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Whereas like I mean HEMA, back when I started HEMA in like 2004, we're just transitioning out of kind of we're transitioning away from like metal weapons reenactment, and it was a really really big thing when people were like, oh hey, historical swords, historical swords are a lot lighter than. I mean, this was back like this was
Yeah.
back when most of the replicas you get were like sometimes around 2 kilos and stuff. So actually, probably a bit more similar to stuff that's sold specifically.
That's a
for
very big
Buhurt.
sword.
Yeah, I was actually found the first sword I got, like first arming sword I got, was like an old Hanway sword, and it was a light sword, but it was considered quite light back in the day. I compare it to like all of the modern HEMA swords I use, and I'm just like, yeah, these things were heavy, but it was like that ability to just accelerate a weapon and hit really really quickly.
Yeah.
That was a big game changer in HEMA back in the day. It's kind of interesting that with the pro fights, I know they're trying to deter that a bit and kind of be like, no, we want big heavy strikes. Do you think that's like a spectator thing? Like they want they want those big hits and that continuous fighting, or is it more kind of like do you kind of have any thoughts on like what the motivation behind that is?
It's definitely to encourage other strikes other than just with your sword. So you can punch your elbows, your kicks, and your knees. They're also your score gainers. So you want to be mixing those in with then just sword strikes, because then it almost just becomes like a sword and shield duel, where it's like you want to bring in more of the MMA stuff into your pro fight.
Okay, cool.
So it's just the balancing for that format.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting.
Big choppy sword.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of interesting that they don't like that. If it wasn't, if they allow lighter swords, like they allow sort of light sword. By lighter, I think we're probably talking about the sorts of weight of sword that would commonly use in HEMA. Like the sort of the MMA stuff becomes a lot rarer. Like I don't know. I find that kind of interesting. Like even with the ability, like even with continuous strikes, if people could, they would just hammer sword blows from a distance.
Yeah, absolutely. So back a few years ago, they didn't have that regulation, using really light arming swords and just racking up with really quick sword strikes. So they wanted to change up the balance for that. So the arming swords you'd use for the dueling categories would probably be like not much more than a kilo. So not much more than a kilogram. Whereas some of the pro fight swords with the weight balanced a bit further towards, a lot further towards the tip, can be like 1.5 kilos.
Wow. Yeah. So big difference. Yeah. Okay, cool. And so I've got another question. So someone said, if I steal your axe during a Buhurt, what can I do with it? So I think questions like, yeah, if you disarm someone, can you use their weapon, or like, is that sort of stuff allowed?
I don't believe you can use an opponent's weapon.
Okay.
It is possible I'm wrong about that, but I don't think you can use your opponent's weapons.
I take it
that they have to go get their weapon. I guess you can defend yourself with it.
Yeah. Okay, so I take it this isn't a common thing. Like disarms not terribly common.
Oh no, they are common, yeah. But generally, it sort of results in them them having a period of time where they can't attack you, and they have to go retrieve a new weapon from their side.
Okay.
Or you can hang on to them and expose them to a teammate to strike.
Cool. Yeah, I'm assuming this was a technical question, not not sort of a proper medieval. If a squire steals a knight's secondary horse, do they get to keep it, or does it go to the knight from whom the squire? Yeah. that is literally a question. I have to try and find this book. It's amazing, but yeah,
Oh, okay.
this guy's
Sounds
absolutely.
like a fun book.
Oh yeah, no, it's pretty much, it's a list of questions that were to be asked to talk like to the people running tournaments, and it was because it's the stuff the guy wanted to know going in, and it's all stuff like that. It's all like half of it is basically just property law. It's nuts. Um, yeah. So I guess kind of just off the back of what we are talking about before, we we're saying like in the pro fight particularly, they tend to have heavier, high point of balance swords. What
Yeah.
are some of the as a way of ensuring like you have like a full range of techniques? What are some of the other kind of rules considerations being brought in to try and foster a particular style, or to facilitate a particular style of fighting in Buhurt or HMB generally?
So I guess like with the dueling categories, like sword and buckler is a bit unique where you can actually punch with your buckler, but it doesn't score points, so you can use it like a stun. But in sword and shield, you're only allowed to push your opponent. You can't punch with them, so that's more encouraging that sword play. And yeah, in longsword, yeah, that's also a foul to punch someone or kick them or anyway. And you also have your grappling very heavily restricted, so you're not allowed to control them in a grapple or throw them or anything, which you might be able to do in the other formats. So they direct it towards that style of fighting. In the Buhurts, it's more sort of limited to, what's effective at doing damage. So you can do, quick sword strikes. It's not going to hurt someone through armor. So why would you do it? That sort of thing. It's just a waste of energy.
Yeah, and that sort of like that energy conservation is really important. Do you get a lot of people like just collapsing from fatigue? Like people, like in the Buhurts particularly, like do you ever get cases of people just go down because they can't, like they just collapse from fatigue, like they just gas and can't keep going?
That can be really common in especially like pro fight, because that's just really exhausting. Like you throw them down and they're too tired to continue and stuff. There's also a rule where if you get into the ground and you finish your ground and pound period of that 10 seconds, they have 10 seconds to stand up and can't stand up in 10 seconds, and that's considered a KO. So they're eliminated like that. So pro fight's a big one. In Buhurt, people often go down, say you just get a headlock on someone and sit your weight on their head, and they've got to try and like deadlift themselves to stay up. You can really tire them out, just them trying to resist and stay up, so they could take a knee from that. And depending on how their straps or their helmet and breastplates configured, that could even choke them. So you can choke someone out like that.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but generally, it's like grapples, because Buhurt rounds can go 5 minutes. If you don't get taken down and you're grappling just for a solid 5 minutes, some people don't have the stamina to do that, so they'll take a knee.
Okay, so you actually get people like voluntarily kind of like voluntarily quitting as a way of kind of preserving energy long term. Oh wow. Yeah, that's kind of cool. It's like I mean, it's very one thing I kind of noticed, like the mindset seems to be very, very different. Like I guess like with HEMA, it's very technical, very sort of like what counters what, how do you set up, like sort of like when do I use this kind of cart, how do I set this up? Whereas I think I find it really interesting that HMB, like it's big kind of macro considerations, like it's big kind of how do we get the team working together, how do we make sure that everyone is how to make sure that everyone can stay the duration of the fight, like even the counting points things. It's like I was kind of I was kind of thinking just in terms of like video games. It's like it's almost different genres of video games where HEMA sort of is very much like your sword sims, I guess, where it's about like something like Mordhau or Mountain Blade, whereas HMB seems to be more kind of more like your real-time strategies or your MOBAs, where it's like how do we get the team to work together? How do we make sure like the tank gets healed properly and stuff like. Which I know that's probably an incredibly nerdy analogy, but I am.
No, that's a very common analogy we have with our discussions on like team tactics and stuff. The similarities there.
Yeah, no, that's really really cool.
But there is also all that room for when do you use this certain counter and stuff, because you still have that whole fencing component in. It's just cut only fencing, but it's still there in a pretty full level.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, well, I think we're talking about that with like the training before. Like you were saying that a lot of people who are doing that particularly are actually going like they're actually cross training. They're doing a lot of like HEMA cross training as well, just to kind of get to kind of bring that sort of skill set in, which I find really interesting. Like you sort of,
and a lot of that the more HMB that sort of people universally do if they don't do HEMA separately is originated from HEMA anyway.
Okay. Cool. That's right.
Or very heavily inspired.
Yeah. Okay, that's
really like only cool. so many ways to swing a sword.
yeah, true. Well, I mean, I found that I don't know that's something just when I was sort of like researching this and talking to people, I found really interesting having come from like a metal weapons reenactment background, because in metal weapons reenactment, you actually don't seem to see a lot of HEMA. I don't know if that's just because metal weapons was around for like sort of 20 years before, or was around before HEMA, and so most of the people who got into HEMA kind of came out of it, or what. But yeah, I just found that really interesting, because when I was doing metal weapons reenactment, I'd be like, oh, I found this this cool thing in I-33, or reading Hutton, I got this cool thing, and a lot of people are like, yeah, no, you can't do that, can't hit the forearms, can't stab to the face, can't
you're limited by your safety equipment.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably the bigger variable, whereas with HMB it's just you take thrusts out, but there's still just such a huge array of techniques you can still use. If you're taking
it doesn't have as much impact as you think, taking away thrust, because like say a punch kind of fills the same role. So instead of a thrust, you throw in a punch, and it's that direct line straight ahead. So when you're actually fighting, you don't really notice, like say this is mostly pro fight I'm talking, you don't really notice the lack of thrust, whereas dueling you definitely do. Where it's just the sword play.
Yeah.
I believe we had a question up before.
Yeah, we did. So we got off topic. I'm like, I'll just take that down so that people don't get confused. But yeah. Cool. So what kind of armor do you use?
Yeah, so generally use 13th century and onward harness, probably up to like 17th. Most popular would be like Western armor. So like your more English or Italian type styles, like just Western, as long as you can sort of you can place your kit like in a plausible geography, and all your gears within 50 years of each other with your sources, then you're allowed to use that. But like in local tournaments, we aren't too stressed about that. You can also use Eastern armor kit. So like your Rus, Eastern Europe kit, where you got like a lot more like lamellar type stuff. And then you'd have to use different weapon sets, like you'd have to use sabers instead of falchions, all that sort of thing. You have to use weapons appropriate for the armor that you're using. You even can use like Mongolian armor if you go further east, or like I've seen people use Chinese armor. People are having trouble getting Japanese armor though that's safe enough to use. So because that has to be pretty heavily modified. So like if you were getting that to be safe enough, you'd have to add a whole lot of extra steel and stuff that would just make it really heavy, and then it probably wouldn't look like historical armor anyway, so it won't get approved by the historical authenticity committee on that. But you don't really use anything like chainmail and stuff because that just doesn't protect you enough from the blunt trauma. Yeah, so like full plate, and then gambeson underneath, maybe some foam, because we're allowed to use some modern protective stuff as long as it's hidden, so that it doesn't look inauthentic. And brigandines are extremely common, so just like coda plates, all that sort of stuff, because your cuirasses are starting to become a little bit more common, but because they have to be extremely high quality and fit you right to work well, and can generally be pretty expensive. It's a bit inhibiting, where a brig's a lot easier to get right and can fit multiple people, so you can trade armor around a bit.
Okay, cool. That's interesting, because I forget who I was talking to, but someone actually asked me why it was that brigandine stayed in consistent use when you had like the full cuirasses. But if you can trade a brigandine, like if it doesn't need to fit as well, that makes sense. That's kind of cool. Historical insight in there as well. Cool. So I've got some questions that kind of extended from that. So someone's actually asked what weapons and armor themes are there and their restrictions. So you're kind of saying before, so it's like within 50 years, primarily Western European, bit of Eastern, and then sort of Mongol. You're seeing Mongolian, Chinese. So there's no. I get the impression there's no like regional restrictions. It's not like they don't require you to they're perfectly happy for people to wear armor from kind of anywhere in the world from a given period.
Yeah.
Cool.
The where the restrictions come into is safety restrictions and authenticity restrictions. So like the problem I was saying before with the Japanese armor is it doesn't meet the safety regulations if it is authentic. Because the armor just doesn't provide enough protection, like especially like your elbows and stuff like that, or your hands, gauntlets, just weren't nearly as protective in the Japanese armor. You have to have that with your more westernized. It's almost like stylized Western armor. Western armor is stylized to look Japanese, but then that's not authentic. So you're not allowed to use it. That's all where the limit is. Like it needs to cover all the necessary areas to be safe to use, and has to fit. It has to be authentic enough to get approved. If it doesn't meet either of those, so you can have authentic armor that isn't safe enough, can't use it. Protective armor that isn't authentic, can't use it.
Okay, and there's not like. So you just have, it's just two criteria that you need to meet. It's not a thing where they try and sort of weigh historicity against safety or anything. It's just like, no, you have to be safe, have to be historical, bang.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
There's some leeway, like the authenticity stuff is mostly how it appears. Like you can, as I said, we can have foam. I use like motorcycle protection as an extra layer over my spine. That's becoming really common because otherwise you can, you don't want spinal injuries. No. But yeah, like you can also have titanium armor because it looks close enough to steel, but it's a bit lighter. Which isn't really, the weight isn't really too historic because a lot of findings were of really thin steel armor, but that just isn't protective enough.
Well, so so the armor is thicker than it was historical.
Not necessarily, but like historical armor had massive variance. And our armor varies a lot too. Like you vary from like zero 0.8 to zero 0.8 mil, like on your arms or something like that, to 3 mil on your helmet even. So there's a big variance in how thick your armor is in certain parts. And it's also up to personal preference over protection or weight is another thing that determines what people want in their armor.
Oh, cool. So I guess there's kind of an extension of that. So someone wants to know, what are the pros and cons of East and West kits?
So they're talking like your Rus kits, so like your like your Ukrainian era, like Kiev, all that sort of stuff, versus Western. In my opinion, Western's just like superior armor. That's just my opinion, because you got like your full protection, full movement. It just works really well without really any compromises, and so much variability. So like you can stack on protection over extra bit, or you can have it really cut down and lightweight for duels, all that sort of stuff. Eastern kit, like you can have your Katungas and stuff like that. They can be cool because it's like just putting on a jacket and you've got your padding and all your plates in at once. And like the upper arms are just part of like the body armor. So it's pretty cool that way. And because the armor's like, you got pretty much like bazu bands there that are separate from the upper arm. You've got like really free arm movement, stuff like that. A lot of it's sort of personal taste as well. So what style you like, but they're also limited with gauntlets and sabatons. So they've got to have like chainmail on their greaves and their sabatons to make it look more authentic, because they had those parts of armor connected with. So that's a weight disadvantage over Western, which could just be clean 8 mil, 0.8 mil steel, which is really light. Whereas chain's like one of the most heavy things you can put on. So that's a disadvantage. And like adding chain over your gauntlets when you want that to be as light as possible for dueling and all that sort of stuff. So that's another disadvantage.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I think because we're sort of getting towards kind of finish time. So this is a kind of a good question to finish up with. If someone wants to try HMB, what would you recommend?
So I recommend trying to find a club near you if you can. It's only a new sport, so there aren't too many clubs around. There's only 2 in Victoria. There's one in Ballarat, which is the one I run, and then another one in Melbourne. So there's plenty of people that aren't close to a club. So what I would recommend is then seeing, say, there's a HEMA club nearby, which, again, there isn't too many about. So that can be difficult. Or if not, try, say, find MMA or some other type of martial art like that, where you learn all those fundamental grappling and striking skills, which you can then transfer into sword play as well. Or like striking with an axe, all that sort of stuff, all that core rotation is really applicable. And then watching fights online, people more and more putting out like technique videos and stuff. So, you know, you could get an axe handle and start practicing like that until you get an opportunity to try and train with the local club.
Yeah, that's cool. So sort of build up, like just do all the sorts of things that are, or like all the sorts of cross training sort of things that HMB people do until you can find a club.
And definitely start lifting weights. You need to build that fitness and build that strength.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds very, very important. All right, cool. Let's finish up there. So first off, Dan, thank you so much. Like, this has been really informative and really, really just
Yeah.
really great to have, just.
It's been a pleasure.
So
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and and honestly, I've gotten a lot out of it just as someone who's watched the sport but kind of not really understood what's going on behind the scenes. It's going to be really, really cool. So definitely, I'll have a much better appreciation of it next live stream. Cool. So the other thing is, if you did enjoy this talk and wanted to, support the Old Sword Club and what we do, certainly like, share, subscribe, do all those social, good social media things. The other thing is, if you could make a financial donation, that would be really appreciated, especially as we're coming out of COVID and we'll be looking to start back up, start classes again. So we'll have like insurance and hall hire and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of the talk. But again, thank you, Dan, for just all of your insights, and yeah, good luck
welcome.
with.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
No problem. All right. Yeah. So, and thank you everyone who came and watched.